From Hong Kong, Chicago, and the city of Stoke-on-Trent, this is the Classic Lenses podcast. Hello and welcome to episode 92. My name is Simon Forster and I'm joined by Johnny Sisson and Perry G. Hello, Johnny.
Good morning, all.
And hello, Perry.
Hello, good evening.
Yeah, it's getting late in Hong Kong because most of the world, or a lot of the world I should say, the clocks have now gone back. They went back this weekend for Johnny, they went back the previous weekend for myself. But poor Perry, you're now, where you used to start the recording of this podcast around about 9 o'clock in the evening, you're now starting after 10 o'clock. Oof.
That's right. So I have a nice pot of Sri Lankan Ceylon tea next to me. A little bit of warmth and caffeine to keep me nice and snug on the cold, frigid Hong Kong winters.
And you, of course, have a shot of Malort in there too, right, Perry?
Yeah. I haven't decided what to name that cocktail yet, but got to give a nod to our sponsors.
Right, exactly.
Well, good luck with that, Perry. Right. And we have a guest with us this week, because I'm delighted to say that we're joined by John, the trucker torpedo Bruning. Hi, John.
Hey, guys. How's it going?
It's going well. And just for the benefit of our listeners, John is an acclaimed cat and American football photographer. I say American football photographer because obviously the game they play in America is American football and not football. So I just like to clarify that point. So it's great to have you with us, John.
Thank you. It is a total honor to be here, honestly. You guys are so much fun, and you've kept me company in the middle of the nights when I've been trying to sleep after a long night of writing. And many, many times I've just been lying there listening to the podcast, just cracking up with the crazy things you guys say. And I've learned a lot.
Yeah. Well, if we can teach things and if people enjoy what we're saying, then that's great. But most of the time, it does appear to be nonsense that we come out with. People tend to shout at us more often than they agree with us. But there you go. Okay, now we're going to head over to having a chat with John a little bit later. But I think to start off with, let's catch up with some of the things that we've been up to, and we'll go over to Hong Kong first while Perry's still awake.
I've been up to a bunch that we didn't talk about last time, and I will save a lot of that for next time too. But got a couple new lenses, one of which is, well, I blamed the purchase on you, Simon, but that's not strictly true. And what else? I've been out shooting a bunch, both protest and street, and the few times recently I've gone out shooting with my girlfriend, you know how she uses my Hexar RF? She has decided that the 35 Summicron that I have is the only acceptable lens that she's willing to use. And so now I'm trying to figure out, what am I going to use when she's out there using the lens that I use the most?
Just I was going to say, just a question. I've seen you've shared these photographs that your girlfriend's taken just between ourselves, and they are absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
Does she share them is she on social media somewhere where people can see these things, or she keep them to herself at the moment? Because they're fantastic stuff.
They're mostly to herself. I think she may have a somewhat secret presence, but let me check with her if she's cool with me broadcasting to our millions of listeners before I tell you where to find her. Yeah. But yes, her stuff is really good. Because, she's like a tiny little Asian woman, right? So she doesn't have that. She's so non-threatening. So she could get shots that I could never get. She can just walk right up to people in their face and just kind of, smile innocently and then just take a photo of whatever they're doing. And I'm standing there on the other side of the road going, I wish I could do that. So, and everything else I'm going to save for next week. So that's pretty much it. Unless you guys have good strategies for preventing your significant others from hogging your favorite lenses. Otherwise, over to Johnny. Yeah.
Perry, given the lens that you just got, I don't understand your problem here. I mean,
Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's not like I don't have other lenses to choose from. That is true. But that's my go-to sort of default lens because it's fast. The throw is perfect for street. And basically, I tried to get her to try a few other lenses. I put the Konica UC Hexanon 35 f2 on her camera, and she was like, it's a little bit too smooth. The damping on the Summicron is a little bit nicer because it's got a bit of resistance. So then I gave her the Canon 35 f2, and she was like, this doesn't feel anywhere near as robust. It doesn't feel as nice to use. And I was like, damn it.
That's hilarious.
So are you not going to tell us about this Wonder lens? Have we got to wait till next week to hear about it, your new acquisition, or should we cover it this week?
Well, I got two. I repurchased the old Canon 35 1.8, which I used to have, and I really, really like the way that lens rendered. But the one that I used to have, it didn't focus quite accurately on my rangefinders, so I sold it to a Sony user at a discount. And then I just picked up another one for fairly cheap, relatively, and it's perfect. So that was nice. And then soon afterwards, I saw a really nice deal on a Canon. Oh, this is the sweet thing I just picked up on a Canon 35 f1.5 LTM, which I was gonna wait for Dan Tamarkin's auction in Chicago, but I got impatient, and B, this one is probably significantly cheaper than I would be able to get it from Tamarkin. And it came with the original hood and case and everything. And I mean, I wanted this lens for a long time because it's the fastest LTM 35 millimeter lens. And the other fast 35 millimeters, the ones faster than like 1.8 that'll fit on M mount, they're like the Leica Summilux pre-aspherical, which is, I don't really like that lens. Then there's the aspherical ones, which are huge. There's the Voigtlander Nocton, which I have a love-hate relationship with, and I've bought and sold like millions of times. And then the Zeiss Distagon, which I do have, but it's a little bit too big. So this seems to tick all the boxes, and initial tests are very, very promising. I just put because we started recording a little bit late today, I just put a half roll of Cinestill through that lens before I came back.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I'll talk more about it next week. But it's cool.
I was going to say that, but just to get this straight, you earlier on in the week you bought a 35 1.8 Canon LTM lens, and then you went out and bought a Canon 35 1.5 lens, and that's just quite normal, is it? You see what I'm getting at there? You know,
I fail to see the problem. No. Okay, so the 1.8. It renders quite differently from the f2. And, I've been looking for lenses that are going to give me a bit more character in this cinematic look quest. And that definitely hits the spot. And then the 1.5, I mean, I want to try it. It's faster.
It sounds reasonable to me, Perry.
Yeah. I mean, I got them for prices that, if I'm going to sell them, I'm going to make a profit. So it's all good. Plus, the 1.8 is much smaller.
Yeah, John, right. John, I was going to say, John, is this something you can relate to? As you own quite a few lenses there. Is there a bit of Perry in you?
Oh yeah, except I think we're operating at different levels because the like the 35-1.5. Yeah, if I were to purchase that, the family would kill me because at the moment we're dealing with private university tuition, and that's pretty much sucking down all of my discretionary income. So like last year, to keep my gas habit fed, I just started buying Kiron zooms. Those were like 10, 15, 20 bucks a piece. So yeah, but I have a thing for Angenieux lenses. Yeah, and those are pretty expensive. But back in the day, I was purchasing a couple of those. But yeah, then my daughter decided to become a biology major, and yeah, that sucks a lot of my income down.
It's interesting there how you were buying lenses just to even though they were cheap and they weren't particularly desirable in any shape or form, but you just felt better for it. That I've got a new one. I've got a new lens. I can try it out at least, and then move on to the next.
Oh yeah, totally. And honestly, I was completely surprised about how good these zooms really are. You know, just reading online about classic lenses when I first got into this calling. It's not really. I guess it's a passion or a hobby. I don't know. It's sort of a way of life, I think. Uh, and pretty much everything I saw online was, don't even bother with the old zooms, but some of them are actually pretty good.
We're absolutely guilty on this show of helping propagate that point of view about being anti-zoom as far as old zooms are concerned. We get asked ask questions occasionally about what's a good zoom, and we might reluctantly talk about a few of the better known lenses which are viewed to be at the top of the zoom pile, like the Minolta MD 35 70 3.5 constant, for instance. That just seems to be like a standard answer that comes out, but it is a bit of an anomaly, really, because many of the lenses that we cherish and love and admire, we do so because of their inherent problems. What we call character is usually an aberration of some description, and by the very nature, older zoom lenses are flawed lenses compared to prime lenses of the day, because it's very difficult to make a zoom lens correct at every single focal length and so on, and they also tend to be slower, and I think that's actually probably the bigger reason why we don't get too excited over zoom lenses. But we do see photos posted with zoom lenses, and frankly you would not know specifically that it was a zoom lens. You don't look at these photographs and thinking, oh, that's no good because it's obviously been taken with a zoom lens. It's just a nonsense, and it's a snobbery, really. But it's also about really where people's interest lies, and I think that people like the faster primes. They just, in some way, they're nicer to hold, but the usability of a zoom lens and for the main part, the image quality that people get out of them, whether it be on digital or on film, is perfectly adequate. And if you've got the right photographer behind that lens, then you're going to get really good photos.
I agree. I think for what they are, they're pretty good. I took an Access 35 to 70 f2.5 to the old Umatilla Chemical Weapons Depot out in Eastern Oregon earlier this year and photographed a training exercise at sunrise. And the photos I got were astonishing. I mean, they were weird. Some of them were very, very soft. I shot into the sun and silhouetted the soldiers. And then I took that lens and photographed a bar band in Vancouver, Washington. And it's not super sharp. It's got tons of character. The bokeh's a little weird, but I got this lens for free. The local shop owner handed it to me. He's like, I can't sell this. Nobody wants something called Access. And I figured, you know what? If I'm out in the middle of the Eastern Oregon desert and I bang this thing, or one of the soldiers runs into me, or I fall off a bunker, I am not out any money other than maybe the body. But, taking expensive lenses out and doing, like a photojournalist shoot is problematical for me. I try to protect the pro level glass that I've got. So taking that lens out was an interesting experience. And after that, I started taking all sorts of different classic lenses out to those training exercises. And the zooms, they function in that role, broad daylight, just fine. And at one point I was taking night photos on a tripod with a Canon 28 to 210 walk around that I had completely rebuilt. And I was surprised at what it was getting. I was really amazed.
Well, back in the day, those super zooms, as they were called back then, those a wide angle all the way going through to a decent telephoto length. I can remember those actually coming out, because that was when I was initially getting interested in photography in the mid to late 80s, and that's roughly around about the time when those lenses were coming out. I think Who was the first one now? I think Takina. I think they were the first people to bring one out, but they were certainly, it was the third party brands were pushing these super zooms, and a lot of people even back then were looking down on them and talking about the resolution of them isn't as high, and and this is obviously in the days of film, so even then there was a little bit of a stigma attached to them, but. I mean, I used to use zoom lenses back in the day, and I used to be very, very happy with the results I used to get with them. So, but yeah, it's a good point there. If you are going to go out and do photography in it, and you're putting your equipment at risk, it tends to be the lens that's the most at risk, and therefore, if it's only worth pennies, then you can be a lot happier with the kind of abuse that you may be about to give it.
Truly. With that KARL Super Zoom, when I first got it, I think I paid under $50 for it. And at the time, Ed and I were really trying to work on using off-camera lighting. So anybody who came to the house, if they were going to sit down and play cards or something with the kids, I had a softbox set up. I had lights all around the table, and I would just sit there and I'd practice and shoot photos of them. And I actually shot indoors with that KARL at 210. And I could not believe how good the portraits came out. I was astonished. That lens is surprisingly sharp for the focal range that it has. So that was a total keeper. I mean, they're never going to compare to the primes, of course, but there are times where I've found, you're running around, running and gunning some event. And having a prime, it becomes a liability because you cannot move fast enough to capture the action properly. So having the zoom makes sense.
Yeah, what you just said there about the being particularly good at 200mm, though, that can actually be one of the properties of many zoom lenses, because most zoom lenses appear to get used at one end or the other.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So so you've got a 28mm and a 200mm lens. That's nothing in between. And the other thing is, they can't. Well, they're usually optimized at one end or the other, and I would probably imagine they're probably generally more optimized to be sharper at the telephoto end than the wide end. So I get the feeling it's probably easier to make it sharper at that end than it would be to make it sharper at the wide end. Plus, you're going to be looking more at the details in a photograph when something's been taken with a telephoto lens. I'm guessing anyway. I think that's just human nature. Yeah. Okay. I just think I just took that away from Perry there. Although I think that might have been sort of closing with what he was saying, because he seemed to be a little bit circumspect about talking about what he's done this week, because he's got so much to say. So should we carry on with your week next week, Perry?
Yeah. I was that was my attempt to bat it over to Johnny, asking for advice on how to get my girlfriend to let me use my Summicron.
I don't know anything about women.
Well, actually, that's something, because Johnny, you're quite famous at the moment, aren't you? You're all over the internet with a video.
Oh yeah,
there's a Johnny tape out there.
What? I still don't understand what this has to do with women, but okay, we can go there.
Because they're gonna see it and then become.
Oh, okay.
Swooning. Women have been swooning all over the internet.
I think you're the only one that's been swooning, Simon. Actually, I don't know.
I was impressed.
We had.
This could go south so fast.
Oh yeah, definitely. No, we had at Central Camera was it last Tuesday, I think? One of our customers who he is a news cameraman guy for the local ABC affiliate in Chicago. And he comes into the shop quite a bit, and I had a chat with him because he was looking at, so he shoots video, for the news station, but they want him to do more still photography. So he came in and we had a chat about mirrorless stuff, and really nice guy. I've talked to him before. But he kind of showed up out of the blue or called up out of the blue about a week later or so and said, "Hey, can I come in and do a little story on you guys?" And the owner's like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." So I mean, he comes in and he just started shooting and did some interviews with myself and other staff folks. And it's one of those things, people come in a lot to the shop and do things like this. So every once in a while there's a little story on us because we're one of the older businesses in Chicago, certainly older businesses downtown. And it's a quirky place. So every once in a while we get a story done on us, but so he does all these interviews and we're talking, and you never know if or when they're actually going to make it onto the actual news. So we figured out it'll show up in sometime in the future. And then people started coming in and saying, "Oh, I saw you guys on the TV yesterday." We're like, "What?" So I went searching around and I found the video in fairly short order. So yeah, it was neat. Everyone, like I said, every once in a while somebody will come into the shop. We had a news crew in over the summer that did a little mini feature. Also, we have a lot of students that come in from the various universities, and they'll do stories for the student paper or whatever. But yeah, this was pretty neat. I mean, it was. I guess I'm still not sure what time of day it actually aired, but a lot of people seem to have seen it. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. And he was a nice guy and talked to many different people at the shop. So yeah, it seems like people really enjoyed it.
So that, I mean, it's only about 3 minutes or so, isn't it? But how long were they actually filming on the day?
He was in for about, I don't know, an hour or so, hour and a half. And he came in when it was early, which was good because it gets busy there. As we get into the afternoon, it gets very busy. So he came in early and it was quiet and we had a chance to chat, talk to a few different people. And then he kind of stuck around and got some shots of, just the action there at the shop, people coming in, us talking with people and that sort of thing. So yeah, I guess he was there, an hour and a half.
I mean, that
so
sounds,
when you were,
I was just going to say that sounds pretty slick to me. Relatively short period of time he was actually there for, really. But looking at the output,
well, I mean, he's just kind of a one man team. I mean, he had one of those Canon high-end Canon digital video cameras, and I actually set him up with an LED light on a light stand, just so he had some additional light, which was super easy. And then he just kind of walked around and did his thing. So it worked out pretty good. It certainly didn't interrupt our day. And the boss is generally pretty happy to do that and tell the story of his family's, how they started the shop and his involvement in the shop. And so yeah, it was good. He had a good rapport with everyone. So
when you say you had a high-end Canon, you're talking about the C series, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Not
a DSLR, like a proper digital video camera.
Yeah, because after we had Bill Pavetta on, and we spent quite a long time talking about Canon EF mount cameras.
Yeah,
there were a couple of people who in feedback to that episode said things like, "Why didn't you guys talk about Sony?" And I was like, "No. If you're doing
proper like
video,
real cameras, yeah, like real video cameras,
5D, right?
Right."
So when you were talking to this guy about mirrorless, did you sell him a Sony?
Well, we don't carry Sony at the shop, so I wouldn't have a Sony to sell him. And he wasn't really interested in the Sony anyway, so that worked out fine. But I mean, I talk to people about everything. If people ask about mirrorless, it's not like I pretend like Sony doesn't exist because we don't sell it. I mean, I talk about what's good and what's not good about all of it, and then they can kind of decide what they want. I mean, I don't need to sell somebody on something they don't want, So no, he was very interested in the Fujis because he liked the controls on them. I mean, as a kind of a video guy, he liked the sort of interface on them. So So we chatted about him a bit. He didn't get anything, but we chatted about him and had a good talk.
Nice.
Yeah, it was fun.
Okay, and apart from being on the telly, what else has been happening? In Switzerland?
That's about it. It was a fairly quiet week. It was just a busy week at the shop. So
before we properly introduce our guest, then Johnny, is it snowing in Chicago?
Oh yeah, it had snowed. Yeah, so it was. We had the. I guess it's a holiday. I don't know what you call Halloween. It's a holiday for kids, whatever.
Halloween.
So we had. I think we had like 3 inches of snow on Halloween night, which is great because screw the kids. Like I remember being a kid, it was always freaking snowing and raining or whatever. So these kids are so freaking soft. They need a little snow on Halloween.
They could have come to Hong Kong to trick or treat, and they would have got about 300 cans of tear gas.
Yeah, right. I wouldn't be all for tear gassing them. That's fine too. I mean,
oh my god, that sounds like a reality series.
Yeah, and there was only
trick or treating.
Yeah, well, there was only one shooting apparently. Only one trick or treater got shot in Halloween this year, so it was kind of a quiet. I would credit the snow for that, because usually the number of shootings go down as we have weather events. So yeah. Anyway, it was Halloween, and there was all that goofiness going on, and yeah, and it was snowing like hell. It was actually pretty wild because when you get snow relatively this early in the year, the trees still have leaves on them. So now you have like all the trees with the leaves turning, and then they're covered in snow, big, like thick, heavy white snow. So it was, it's kind of unusual. It's not your typical looking snowstorm.
No, that's good.
Yeah.
We'll move over to. We'll hand over to me about what I've been up to this week, and the answer is not a great deal at all. So this will be a very short section. In fact, the only thing I've actually done of any kind of note this week is I've listed some lenses from my cupboard in my effort to raise the funds for me to justify keeping my 75mm Biotar. And so on eBay right now, I'm looking at them at the moment. I'm feeling a bit uncomfortable about it as I'm looking at them. I'm thinking, and one of them's got bids on it as well, so I'm thinking, well, that's definitely gone now. But the first one being my 50mm f1.4 Canon LTM, which is out the door because of the one that we talked about last week, because I now have KARLs. So I don't need that one anymore, and I want to have KARLs. So that's on its way out at the moment. I've also got on the sales shelf. I've got my Helios 40, my enormous silver Helios 40. That's with a Zenith M39 mount, which is lovely, but it's that thing, isn't it? Helios 40 versus Biotar 75. I want the Biotar 75, even though really the difference is not that great. It just handles.
It's pretty big difference.
It's in reality, you look at the photographs, it's not. But it's actually, as I said before, I prefer the 75mm look over the 85. I feel it encourages me to use it, and I just prefer the handling, but it's smaller, lighter. It's a big beast. Is the Helios 40. And then next to that, I've got a Nikon, in fact, not even it might not even say Nikon actually, because it's one of the old Nikon lenses, and it's an 8.5cm f2, which I'm longingly looking at the moment, thinking, am I doing the right thing? But it's a particularly good thing in itself, because it's a Nikon that actually focuses the right way. As opposed to all the other Nikons, because this is an LTM lens, they made it to focus in the correct way, and it's a really nice lens, and I'm going to miss it because it's not particularly big. It feels great. It's the best Jupiter 9 I've ever used, because it's a Sonor, lens. It's basically got the same lineage as that, and which obviously goes back to the KARL Zeiss 8.5cm Sonar f2. And then finally, my LTM 105mm, or no, it's a 10.5cm f2.5 LTM. Again, with a lens that I've hardly actually used, but I think I've just got a problem with 100mm lenses, and I'm thinking, well, if I'm not using it, why do I keep it when I can potentially keep a 75mm Biotar? So they've hit eBay. So that's my news, I guess, for this week. Yeah,
I've sold lenses too, but I'm not going to talk about them.
Yeah.
I have a question for you guys on that. Like, I can't sell any of my babies. How can you let these go? I mean, it drives me crazy because there's things that I need to just get rid of, and I can't do it. I just hang on to them.
The way I think about it is, like, if by the time you have like 100 children, you might as well sell a couple of them every now and then.
Holy crap.
Classic Lenses Podcast, where we hate children.
It's a Monty Python moment. That whole Catholic song. What was it? Every sperm is sacred.
That's it. Yeah.
We've got to sell the lot of you.
I know what you mean, though. You know, Johnny and Simon, they're in the business of selling lenses, so I assume that they find it a little bit easier. But I struggle similarly. And when I decide to sell a lens, it's usually, I don't know, it's usually because I'm 100% convinced that I'm not going to regret it. And even then, like this 35 1.8 Canon that I just bought, I used to have this lens, and I have now repurchased it. So I'm very often wrong when I sell a lens. But the one I sold tonight, right before we recorded, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to rebuy because it was the 40mm Summicron. And I have the Minolta M Rocore version, which I bought for half the price, and they're the same lens. So that's why I sold the Summicron.
I think. God, sorry, John.
Oh, I'm sorry, Simon. I was just going to say, making the decision on selling something, I always err on the side of keeping the classic lens. So last year, I ended up having to make a choice between selling one of my engineer lenses or a Canon EF 300-2.8, which I was using as a sports lens. And I assumed that I was, with Ed graduating from high school, that I was done shooting football. So I sold the EF, and that set a precedent. I just started selling off most of my older autofocus lenses and not selling the good classic stuff that I have. And now I just get grief every time we go out from Ed. Why did you sell that 300? I need it. So in January, I'm going to be repurchasing that one for him.
Wow. I for myself, I mean, I have a much better time selling other people's lenses, which is why that's what I do for a living. But I don't sell a lot of my own lenses. I'm kind of like Perry on that one. Like, if I'm absolutely sure I'm not going to use it, or if I have 3 copies of it, then I'll sell it. So, yeah. So I haven't sold a lot of lenses. Actually, there's a few notable exceptions to that. I mean, one being the lens that actually Simon has in his hands right now. I had famously sold to KARL because I had 2, but I thought I had 3. So when I realized I only had 2, I was like, oh, I've only have 2. I meant to keep both of those. But KARL really needed a non-wormy 51.4. So I couldn't hold out on getting that lens to him. He really needed it. But I mean, because I have 3 cameras, identical cameras, the Canon 7S, and I thought I had a lens on each one, a 51.4.
3 of those?
Yeah, I got 3 of them.
Jeez.
Yeah, I need to sell like 2 out of the 3 of those. There's another good example. So yeah, I mean, and the other one was I sold Robbie. I had 3 copies of the Olympus Pen 25 2.8, the Pen F lens. And because I just kept coming across them like at ridiculous prices in the middle of the night on eBay. I'm like, well, shit, I gotta get that. It's only like $58, you know. So I finally sold one of those. So Robbie has that lens. But I don't sell a hell of a lot of lenses. Oh, well, and then what I'm doing now is more as I'm trading things because I don't like to go with a whole run around of selling stuff anyway. And so I traded, you know, just recently we talked about it. I traded an Olympus XA and a couple of robot cameras for that Core. So yeah, I really don't sell a lot of lenses either, because if I go to the trouble to buy them in the first place, I don't really buy a lot of lenses in the first place. So I figured if I went to the trouble of getting it, why should I, you know, get rid of it? Mm-hmm. So, but I'm trying to pare it down a little bit. So,
well, in my case, yes, I sell lenses and lenses that I bought specifically to sell. But I don't even like doing that, to be honest. I don't like what I do. It's no fun whatsoever. I'm quite happy selling lens adapters. I mean, lens adapters are great to sell, you know, because you can't get personally attached to a lens adapter, can you? They're just boxes.
Right.
But the thing, problem with lens adapters, and if anybody's been on my site will notice that the number of lens adapters available is decreasing all the time. That's because of just difficulty with suppliers, and so I'm just winding that side of things down, which means I've really got to sell more lenses. So yeah, I'm creating misery for myself. But the thing is about these lenses that, as I say, they've come out of my cupboard. They're lenses that I've had for a number of years, but they are lenses that I haven't used for some time. In fact, I think I put a sample shot up with the Nikon 8.5 centimeter with the advert, and I think it was probably the last photograph I took with that lens, and must be about 2 years ago, and it's an LTM lens, and I think this is leading me to somewhere else now. So I've got two LTM lenses up there, which I really like adapting those to Sony and using them on digital, because they're not too big. Although ironically, the two Nikons are really, really heavy lenses relatively to what they are in size, but they don't take up much space, and so you can put them into a small bag. But the thing is, they are LTM lenses, and that experience I had a week and a half ago now of shooting with the Contax G2 that's on loan to me from Jeremy North, I really enjoyed that experience much more than I know that I would have done if I was shooting with my M2. So I realise now I'm selling two lenses that would fit that M2, and I'm thinking, am I beginning to turn my back on the M2? Because at the end of the day, if you've got a camera there that's worth a fair bit of money and you're not using it, and you're not going to use those lenses, and you would actually rather use other lenses, because I have a 90mm f2.8 sonar for a G2, even though I don't actually own a G2, but I've got the lens ready for it, along with a 45mm lens, and I'm sure that I will get use out of those. So what is the point of keeping these things? And as you can tell, I'm really trying to justify selling these lenses that are on eBay at the moment, which is it's upsetting me just looking at them at the moment.
Don't sell the 8.5 centimeter Nikkor, man. That lens is amazing.
It's lovely. It's nice. It takes great photos, and it's nice to look at and nice to hold. But even though it's got like a little, I think it's spent some period of time without a lens cap, and there's like an abrasion right in the centre of the element, the front element, which is really annoying when you're looking at it. But it makes zero difference, as we know, to the actual to the shots. But it's a lovely lens, and I'm there thinking, well, I've got other lenses, but actually, I don't think I have an 85 f2. I've got 85 2.8s, which I'm happy with. I've got that 92.8, and of course I've got the 75 1.5, which frankly is going to get the gig over this one most times anyway. Or I'll take the my KARL's Eye sonar for the Contax, the 85 2.8, which is probably my favourite portrait lens, really. So it's keeping things for the sake of keeping things. I'm not sure how healthy that is. Plus, and this is the big plus, I need the money. Because that's the thing. I work for myself, so if I don't sell things, then I can't pay the bills. And if I'm going to keep nice things such as a 75mm Biotar, then I have to justify it, and really it makes sense. I'm doing this thing now that we say at the end of every show: be like KARL. I'm trying to be like KARL. KARL was really good at this. He would cut down through his collections. I'm not using that again. Why am I keeping it? And he rarely regretted it, apart from the mere one.
So this is what brings us back to selling children, right?
Yeah.
God. So Simon, when you go to your cabinet and you look at your lenses, do you have an emotional connection with them? Like, you remember what photo you took with a particular lens and you go, oh yeah, we had that moment. And because I do that all the time. I look at mine and I think, oh God, that's the lens that I was using when Sylvie went swimming. I could never sell that lens. So because of the moment that represents in the memory, do you think that way too?
I do, yes. But
really,
I do. But but it's not as much as I used to. I mean, certainly when I first started off in this journey with classic lenses, I could look at a photograph and I would know exactly which lens and probably what aperture I used to take a photograph, and it was very easy for me to make that connection. I seem to be losing that, and it's not because like my memory's fading, which it is, but I can still look at some of those older photographs when it was truly passionate for me, when I was on this voyage of discovery with old lenses. I can look at those photographs and I still know which lens I actually used. These days I seem to be a little bit less attached to some of the newer purchases that I've had, but there are lenses that I look at and think that's just I've got a Jupiter 11 in there, and it's the best Jupiter 11 I've ever used, because as I said before, I used to test every Jupiter 11 that came my way, and I would always just keep the best, and I have the best Jupiter 11 I've ever used in the cupboard. I haven't used the Jupiter 11 for over a year, but there's no way I'm going to sell it, partly because it's not actually worth that much. Whereas these lenses that I've sold, I've put on eBay, they're all worth something. They're worth a few quid, and I'm thinking to myself, if something's only worth £30, £40, $50, $60, it's not going to make any great difference to my life if I sell it and it goes towards the heating or something like that. It's just going to be forgotten about. Whereas selling these larger lenses, these more valuable lenses, means that I actually get to keep something that I've wanted for a long time, and it's more of a case of that 75mm lens is one of those lenses where I've convinced myself that I don't want one of those. They're just too expensive for what they are. So don't worry about it. It's like wanting a Ferrari, but you're never going to have one, so it doesn't really matter. Well, when you get one that's personally put into your hand and you've got the means to keep it, then it sort of makes you think a little bit differently.
I don't know how many times I had this conversation with KARL about selling lenses, because I'm kind of in the same boat. I mean, I would say maybe 10% of the lenses I own are worth more than $100, or far less than that, or I paid more than $100 for. So it's like, is it even worth the trouble to sell something at a certain point? I mean, I'd much rather would trade things, but to sell it, I mean, if I'm going to I always used to do this math with KARL. I'm like, all right, so you bought this for $130. He's like, yeah. And I'm like, you're going to sell it for $150. Yeah. Okay. So you have to put it on Facebook. You have to pack it up. You have to mail it. You have to pay for the postage. You have to do all this. I'm like, so it's all that trouble to make $20? I mean, it's not worth it, And so for me, that's like most of the lenses I have fall into that category. They're just totally not worth the trouble to even go and do it, to sell them. So I'm sort of like, I'll just keep them until the day comes along. If somebody wants to buy it for me in cash in person, that's cool. Or if I want to trade, something to someone else or something, that's cool. But I can't imagine going to the trouble of selling most of what I have. because it would just be too much of a hassle to ultimately not really make any money on it.
Well,
Yeah, and with sorry.
I was just going to say, just on that point, I just realised that these lenses that I'm selling are some of the most expensive lenses by value that I own. And that's the thing, just like yourself, I'm looking at what's in the cupboard at the moment, and there's loads of lenses in there that mean something to me, and they all do something interesting and so on. But the vast majority of them I picked up for pennies, and they're not particularly expensive lenses. There's a few special ones in there, but I don't think any of them are actually worth as much as some of the lenses I'm actually just about to, I have actually put onto eBay now.
So two things on that, because I think it is a very interesting question. I have a really weird system of rationalizing this stuff to myself. But I'm reminded of, I think when Hamish Gill bought his M10P, part of the rationale, I believe, was that he had purchased enough things that were not M10Ps that added together were around the same price as an M10P. And so he could just sell that stuff and kind of trade it and convert it into one. But one thing that I do, which is totally irrational, is I decided that when I have photos that I really, really like and I consider them sort of keepers that I would print out and hang, that to me is worth at least 1,000 Hong Kong dollars or 100 pounds. So for me, when I buy a piece of gear, I sort of think about, has it paid for itself? And using that metric of valuing photographs, the stuff pays for itself super quickly.
Wow, I've yet to find anything that I've done in the last 25 years that it would be worth $100.
I mean, it's not that I would. I don't think anyone would buy it for that amount. It's the way I thought about it is, I enjoy making these photos, and then if someone put a gun to my head and said, "I'm going to delete this photo forever unless you pay me," how much would I pay them to be able to still have that photograph? And that's roughly the amount that I sort of stumbled upon for sort of my favorite images. And then I just kind of rationalized that. So, the X-Pan paid for itself in like a month.
Wow.
I wouldn't pay myself $100 for any of my photos.
Fair enough. I'm very emotionally attached to shooting.
That makes
Not
sense.
so much to the gear, though. Yeah, because I mean, like, most of the stuff that I buy, when I do buy 2 copies of stuff like Johnny, I'll get one that's nice to satisfy my inner collector, and one that's a user that I'll just beat up when I'm out there shooting on the street. Because I don't get emotionally attached to the gear. I get emotionally attached to the images that I make with them. And yeah, that's sort of my totally illogical math to justify the price.
Right. Well, let's move things on. And by the way, if you want to buy any of our lenses, they're currently on eBay, and we'll put links up in the show notes.
To help you there, can I just throw this out there? I think that 8.5 cm Nikkor is the finest 85mm lens for rangefinders.
Yeah.
Would not surprise me. Okay, so that's our week's done, and I think that this is quite a momentous moment in the history of our podcast, because this is actually the first time we've had a guest come on the show that is here because he's got a book to plug. So John, I'm teasing you there, and you know that apart from being an avid, as we said before, cat photographer with classic lenses, you're also a published author, and you have many books to your name. I think actually, on this page here, I think it says you've got 15 that you've been involved in, but you've done some co-authoring of some books as well, haven't you?
Yeah, the total's actually, I'm working on 23 right now. So Race of Aces is 22. Right.
Well, that's it. So you have a new book coming out next year in January, I believe it is. Is that right?
Indeed, yeah. This one was sort of the culmination of my life's work, and in a way, so I was involved in a helicopter mishap in Afghanistan, and while we were sitting on the ground in the middle of the Hindu Kush, I kind of thought to myself, if I make it out of this, there's a bucket list of things I want to do. And I was very fortunate to knock number one off the list a couple of years ago. That became Indestructible, and number two ended up being Race of Aces, the book that's coming out in January.
Right, and I was going to say this is where we first come into contact, because there was an episode a while back, an infamous episode where we first discussed. I'd say it was with Mike Novak when we were talking food and Jepson's Malort, and somehow that led to you writing into us and telling us about things that you might wanted to have done with truck torpedoes whilst in the helicopter. So
Indeed.
Yeah.
There was a village that so I was embedded in Afghanistan in 2010 during the surge, and I was in Logar province, which was southeast of Kabul, along close to the Pakistan border. And the Kabul Attack Network, which was the insurgent network that was feeding the insurgency in Kabul itself weapons and explosives, ran through old supply lines that dated back to the Russian war in the 80s. So through places like the Sorkhab Valley, which is north of our forward operating base, and so I arrived at a very busy time with a National Guard Chinook helicopter unit, and from there I went out on ground patrols and flew a lot of air assault missions. I spent about 100 hours in the back of Chinooks and Blackhawks taking photos of what the air crew were doing, and I have no idea where I was going with this, except that's what I did while I was out there. And my intent was to I was actually a true volunteer. I wasn't assigned, I wasn't working with any newspaper or anything like that. I went out, I wrote stories for the small town papers back home in Oregon. And then from there, I kind of branched out, ended up writing a couple of magazine articles and things like that. And when I came home, I sold my photographs to the Hoover Institute to pay for the trip. So that ended up being the one thing. I sold the photos, and then I sold my little black sports car, which still kills me. But I was basically gone for 6 months without an income, so I had to do something to pay the bills. So I sold my Pontiac Solstice and the photographs.
So I'm just thinking about the process here. So how did you actually get? How did you find yourself in a Chinook in Afghanistan? Because you're not in the army or air force or whatever it is. This is from a journalistic point of view. So what's the story that gets you into that position?
Well, it dates back to my sixth book, called The Devil's Sandbox. There was an Oregon Infantry battalion that was sent into Iraq right at the start of the insurgency. And they were in one of the worst sections of Baghdad, northeast, where right on the edge of Sadr City and north of Sadr City, at a time when the Shia uprising, the two Shia uprisings in 2004 took place. So they were right in the middle of that. They also had elements that were in the Second Battle of Najaf and also Second Fallujah. So they saw a lot of very heavy combat. We had, I think there were about 800 guys total in the battalion, and one female who was their photojournalist, Rebecca May Bruns, Sergeant Bruns, incredible combat photographer. The battalion came home with 77 Purple Hearts and 9 men killed in action. So it was the most combat that any Oregon unit had experienced since World War II. So one of the soldiers was engaged to my daughter's first grade teacher. And when he came home on leave in September or October of 2004, he'd just come back from the Second Battle of Najaf. And he started telling me the things that he saw and experienced, and they just didn't bear any resemblance at all to what I was reading in the paper about the battles. So when the guys started coming home, I started interviewing them, and I wanted to go out, but with them and be out there with them. But by the time I really got into the mindset that I was going to make a jump from writing history to contemporary military, they were already en route home. So the moment that sort of solidified that for me, I was watching the Chalks come home, the flights coming home at McCord Air Force Base. And I was shooting photos of these reunions on the tarmac. And all of a sudden, a shadow crosses my camera. God, I get emotional just thinking about this. And I hear, "Hello, John." And I pulled my eye out of the eyepiece and I look up, and here's one of my wife's students looking at me in uniform. And the thing that got me was I had no idea he was in the service. I had no idea he was in Iraq. And he was my wife's favorite student. And he now has a distillery, and I drink his whiskey when I write, when I sit down and write up in the woods. So that was a moment I'm like, yeah, I'm going to write this book. I'm going to make this jump. And as I was researching the book, they got spun up and sent to Katrina. And I walked into the Oregon Military Department one day. I was going to interview the sergeant major of the battalion. And he's like, "I can't talk to you today, John. We're going to New Orleans as a result of the levees breaking and Hurricane Katrina." And I looked at him and I said, "Take me with you." And he walked next door into the general's office. "Hey, can we take John to New Orleans?" And he said, "Sure." So I found myself in New Orleans living with an infantry battalion for a month in September of 2005, which was probably the most life-changing experience I've ever had. I was far more traumatic and bonding in kind of an unusual way than Afghanistan. And it's also kind of the genesis of my love of photography was that time in New Orleans. So because of that relationship with the Oregon National Guard in 2010, I kind of looked around, was having a midlife crisis, like, screw this. I'm not staying here anymore. I gotta go and see what it is that I'm writing about. I just felt like a complete poser for spending an entire career writing about combat and the trauma and trials of it without having experienced it. So I went out and understood it better as a result.
And you did that from a aspect of being a photojournalist. Is that correct for regional newspapers? Is that right?
Yeah. Actually, I wrote a piece that ended up in the Oregon National Guard journal called "We're Not Leaving You Here, Brother," which was the story of how our Chinook started to catch fire as we were heading up. We had a platoon of Polish infantry aboard with just piles and piles of gear right in the center line of the back bay of the Chinook. And we were flying through the Hindu Kush to a little base called Azuristan. And this outpost was entirely manned by Afghan National Army, and they were surrounded by about 250 Taliban, and things were pretty grim up there for them. And the helicopters that were going in to support that outpost had no force protection. There wasn't like a helicopter landing zone inside the base. It was outside, and there was like one strand of barbed wire around the landing zone. So they were taking fire. So the guys were not super thrilled at having to go do this because we didn't have Apache escort. We had no gunships that day. And as we were flying up there, the crew chief who was sitting on the ramp attached to a line that connected him to the helicopter. So if he fell out, he'd just be dangling by the cord. He stands up and unscrews a panel over his head, and all this smoke starts wafting out. And at that moment, I'm like, something's not right. And then I heard our pilot, command pilot, who is this freaking awesome guy from Georgia, Joe Neal. He was incredible. Anyway, Joe Spiel, I'm sorry. He goes, "Land this aircraft immediately." And Eric West was co-pilot that day, and they auto-rotated and literally dropped us out of the sky. I think we dropped 2,500 feet in 60 seconds. And we were surrounded by sawtooth mountains. I mean, just huge ridge lines, so like dragon spines, I think is how I described them in altitude. There happened to be a dry lake bed directly below us. So, like, if I ever had any question as to whether or not there was any sort of divine presence, I think that solidified my belief that, yeah, there's probably somebody looking out for us. Because, man, any other place we would have been trying to land on the side of a hill with a helicopter that was starting to catch fire. And we ended up setting down, and I have run an organization that provides training support for the Oregon National Guard and Army Reserve and SWAT. We worked with FBI SWAT a couple of times. So I'm familiar with the firearms, and the guys told me if we ever go down, grab the extra M4 that's sitting in the back. Well, I was the last one next to the ramp, sitting in the last seat. So that meant I was the first one off the helicopter. And I completely forgot to grab that M4. I just
M4 carbine, right?
Yeah.
Not
yeah,
like an M4.
Yeah. No, I was sitting with a Canon 7D, and I jump out, and I just start taking pictures of these Polish troops just bailing out of the helicopter and forming a perimeter to protect us. And that article and the photos that I took that day, I've never actually won an award, but a year after I got back, or the spring after I got back, I start getting all these congratulation notices on Facebook. I'm like, what? What? And the Department of Defense had awarded me a Thomas Jefferson Award for that article. So that felt good. It felt like the time there wasn't just for me and my own personal journey of exploring what the hell I was actually writing about all these years, that I actually did some good too. So,
John, just one thing you mentioned earlier, and this is nowhere near as, you know, the same degree of seriousness as a lot of what you've been saying. Are you originally Canadian?
I am not.
By any chance?
I love Canada.
Okay, just you used the term hoser earlier, and I have never heard a non-Canadian use that term.
Yeah, we had a Canadian in the dorms my freshman year, and we watched Strange Brew a lot. So there was hoser, that, and I grew up in California, so I have some surfer lingo in me too that still, you know, creeps up every now and then. So even though I wasn't a surfer, I bodyboarded.
Hoser is like, everybody says, "Hey, hoser." I mean, it's SCTV. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, Bob and Doug McKenzie. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Have a donut, you hoser.
Oh my god.
Well,
so John, when you were photographing out, what were you shooting with, just to, you know, bring things back to
I was a Canon guy. Actually, when I was in New Orleans, I had an Olympus point and shoot. I'd been shooting, like, I went to China Lake, which is a naval weapons test center. In 2003, I was working on a documentary project, and I go out with my wife's Pentax K1000 and a 75 to 150 zoom, and attempted to take photos of F-18s doing touch and goes right next to me. I was standing next to the landing signal officer on the runway. That was a glorious experience, and everything came out blurry because I had no idea what I was doing, and it was at sunset. So I totally blew an opportunity there. So a couple of years later, 2 years later, I had this Olympus point and shoot. We'd actually made the jump to digital, and that camera lasted 2 hours in post-Katrina New Orleans. And the last photo I took of it was the entrance to the New Orleans Performing Arts Center, which the door was propped open. There were a bunch of cables going inside because the 41st Infantry Brigade had made the Performing Arts Center its headquarters. And there was a rooster nesting on top of all the wires and cables. right in the doorway. And it was just such a non sequitur. There were so many moments like that in New Orleans. But that one really stands out. The rooster hanging out at the entrance to the Performing Arts Center. So when my camera failed, the soldiers came up to me and said, "Hey, I have this. Will you shoot for us? Because, we're on patrol. I can't be taking photos." So all of a sudden I find myself in a photojournalism role, which I had never anticipated. And I shot with everybody's point and shoots and came out of New Orleans with about 1,500 photos. And after that, I thought, okay, I love doing this, so I got to get good at it. So I think I bought an Olympus D10, S10, fixed lens DSLR. It was the first one I had, and then I made the jump to a Canon 10D and a 40D, and then the 7D in 09. And I didn't really, I used photography in the past to copy photographs. We did a lot of that at the National Archives in the 90s. And then also I was copying photos out of World War II veterans' photo albums in grad school and things like that with that K1000. But I didn't really know what I was doing. And so I kind of got hooked up with our local shop, Focal Point Photography, and the owner and the current owner now, Nate Woods, just kind of mentored me along and coached me. And I spent literally hours and hours in our local wildlife refuge photographing animals, birds and egrets and osprey and things like that. And I started taking my son out. And that's how he developed his love of photography too, was out in the wildlife refuge.
Wait, there's a missing piece of this puzzle. Your camera, your Olympus that failed in New Orleans, did the rooster destroy it?
Oh, no. It was the heat and humidity took it down. And I was zooming in, zooming out. And I was taking tons of photos with that thing, and the gears were plastic, and it just stripped, and I couldn't get the lens to function after that. So
right,
it was that was rugged. I mean, in Afghanistan, there were moments where we had kind of scary moments, but New Orleans was just grim. I got to know the soldiers and sort of the soldier ethos and mindset, and that was something that was really special to me. But seeing what Americans did to each other at a time of great crisis was it kind of took my my worldview and dumped it on its ass. And frankly, for about a year after that, I was a jerk. I was a really embittered jerk. And the one thing that came out of that was not just the friendships and the connections that I made within the National Guard, but we rescued a kitten out of a flooded and looted motel. And we got this kitten out at a time when 80% of the pets in New Orleans died. And this kitten ended up in a PetSmart in Athens, Georgia, waiting for me when I got out. And the people who rescued these animals in our area were being harassed by the police. They were being harassed by random stray gangbangers with firearms. So the battalion that I was with was protecting them. And because of that protection, they said, "John, if you want this animal, we'll send it to you when you get home." And sure enough, they did. And he had adopted a pal, so we ended up actually with two. And my friend Sergeant Vince Jocks, who was a two-war veteran and had just come off a medical hold after being blown up in in Iraq in 2004, he rescued a puppy named Gustav, a little German Shepherd pup. So we ended up going to the Portland airport one night, and there were two kittens and a dog waiting for us. So that was quite a joyous moment. And we named the kitten Volunteers after the battalion, which is 2nd Battalion, 162nd Infantry, known as the Volunteers. And just either called him Vol or Volley. And Vol was the first travel cat I had. He went everywhere with us. And so I took pictures of him, and in '09, 4 years later, I had a very, very, very close friend, almost like a son to me, get killed in Iraq. And for a while, I didn't think I was going to be able to write military history again after that. So I tried to write the story of how we rescued Volley and the subsequent adventures we had all over the place. I went to 20 publishers and they all said the same thing. The New Orleans stuff is too grim and nobody wants to read about that. So instead of pushing that, I ended up going to Afghanistan the next year. So at some point I'd like to go back and write some fluffy kitten stories and illustrate them with photos from all the classic lenses that I've used. But for now,
I was going to say, it sounds incredible that the publishers didn't want to hear about something that happened in their own back garden, and instead of doing that, you go to Afghanistan instead. And I mean, we have actually had a bit of a chat about this before, and I know that the New Orleans side of things, and just from what I'm gathered, the soldiers' view of working in New Orleans at the time after the Hurricane Katrina was in many ways worse than being in Afghanistan. Is that about right?
Oh yeah, and I would run into guys from like the 82nd Airborne when I was, or who had been in the 82nd Airborne in '05 when I was in Afghanistan, and I would ask them, "Were you in Katrina?" Because we ran into your unit several times, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we were there. I was there." And I'd always ask them the same question, so what's worse? What's harder, Afghanistan or New Orleans? And they all said the same thing. And I felt the same way. It was New Orleans because it happened in our own backyard. New Orleans became a war zone. And as the levees broke and people were being flooded out and dying, there was so much looting going on just blocks away. I mean, like, maybe 2 blocks from where we were staying, which was the New Orleans Baptist Seminary. The unit I was with got moved up there in the middle of the night. It was just like a macabre journey. I mean, we went through downtown New Orleans in a bunch of buses, looking out at what had happened to the city, and it was appalling. Like, the first bodies I ever saw were on that drive up. But there was a gas station where there'd been a shootout, and there was a guy lying dead next to the pumps, and there were 2 other guys killed inside the little convenience store attached. Actually, it was like a meat market, I think, attached to the gas station. And I remember standing next to the Humvee, looking at this scene, and I'm holding my camera, or actually one of the soldiers' camera, and this Sergeant Ken Jackla came up to me. He's like 6'4", really straightforward guy, like one of those guys that you just totally trust your life to because he seems to be always on the ball. And he looks at me, he goes, "John, you're not taking any photos of the dead, okay?" And I said, "Fine." It's like I'm not into that. I never got into horror films. I don't even watch war movies. So not for fun anyway. So he says to me, "And I don't want you getting close because see all that congealed blood?" I'm like, "Yeah." He said, "If you step in that, you're going to slip and then you're going to fall in it and you're going to stink and nobody's going to want to be next to you. And the next shower you're going to have is probably in a month." So I'm like, "Yes, Sergeant." So that was my introduction. I was a very sheltered kid. I'd never seen anything like this. I knew it was going to be tough, but I had no idea. Like, it got to the point where we actually saw some cops disposing of a pistol that they had used in some sort of crime. They probably shot somebody. I actually, in '09, got interviewed by the FBI for a book I was working on with a special operations major who had done the interrogations that led to the killing of the leader of Al-Qaeda Iraq, Musab al-Zarqawi, in 2006. And there was a bunch of operational security concerns. The FBI came out and talked to me. And at the end of that interrogation, discussion, whatever you want to call it. I asked him, look, I have all these photos of these New Orleans cops disposing of a firearm. And when we went, I mean, they threw it into a fire. It cooked off the remaining rounds, and the rounds went over the head of the patrol I was with. So they thought these guys were 6 months back from Iraq. They thought they were under fire, and they just went into instant, combat mode, and they charged out through the little residential neighborhood we were in to find these guys standing next to this little fire they built by a railroad embankment. And they're like, what are you guys doing? And they said, oh, we just threw a couple of cans of canned sausage or something into the fire. There was no bullets. Well, later, after the fire went out, there was this pistol lying there. So I told the FBI about it, and they're like, nobody's going to investigate that, John. Everybody got a pass. After the levees broke, there was so much violence that there was one or two symbolic prosecutions, and that was it. So that was a real hard reality to learn, definitely. But I treasure those photos because someday I'd like to see justice meted out.
Yeah, that's a tough time you had there, and of course you did that without any kind of training really, or preparation, I should say. You literally just got on the plane more or less and went down there, because you'd imagine if I don't know what the specific route is for embedding a journalist or a photojournalist into a battalion, but I'm pretty sure it would normally go through months of training of different things and some psychological assessments and preparation on how to deal with lots of the things that you were going to see. But you walked straight into it. How old were you at the time, if you don't mind me asking?
See, I think I was 37. I was 37. I hadn't actually done any. I just existed behind a desk for years and years and years and years. No exercise. I was totally out of shape. I was almost 300 pounds. I go in there, and we're walking around doing presence patrols for 14 hours a day, and I dropped 30 pounds in a month. And this is the best way to lose weight. Live in the muck next to a bunch of really fit infantry and infantrymen. And okay. So here's the other thing. I was so clueless. We only had MREs to eat, right? Meals ready to eat. I didn't have a knife. I was so completely unprepared for this that I didn't even have a pocket knife with me. And I didn't realize that the Mylar MRE bags can actually be torn open by hand. I thought you had to use a knife. So I would just go through everybody's scraps. And I didn't want to keep borrowing knives, right? Like looking like a complete idiot. So I ate a lot of crackers, a lot of MRE crackers. I ate a lot of MRE peanut butter, which was great because it constipated you, and there was no place to go to the bathroom except an outhouse like 100 meters from where we were sleeping. So yeah, I was completely unprepared, and psychologically also. But the thing that got us through, or me through, was the connections that I made and the friendships that I made within the battalion, and the pranks that everybody started to pull. One of the things I learned while I was there was that the local papers would publish anything I wrote about what their soldiers were doing. So I wrote for the Albany Democrat Herald, for the Forest Grove Times. I think I wrote a couple stories for the Statesman Journal. So anything I wanted to write about these guys, they wouldn't edit it. They wouldn't want a particular slant or anything, which wasn't the case when I was in Afghanistan. I was being given kind of directions from the Oregonian that would have essentially destroyed my relationship with the units that I was with if I had asked them the questions they wanted me to ask. So as I was doing this, one of the things you hear about the whole Band of Brothers connection with, within the warrior community, really that starts with a sense of respect and validation. And I experienced that for the first time. Like, these guys really respected me for being out there, despite how fat I was and how unfit I was. I was hanging with them, and I didn't go down. I mean, there were guys who were dropping from heat exhaustion who were far more fit than me. I mean, they'd have an IV bag in each arm, trying to get them to revive. It was pretty rugged. The heat and the humidity were just grim. And I came very close to going down a couple times, but I always was able to hold it together. And that respect and that connection I built became one of the defining aspects of my life. And the way they show guys who are not really part of that brotherhood, they like them, is they pull all sorts of pranks. So one day, and you know, you have to give it as good as you get it. So I was pulling pranks back, but man, Sergeant Jocks, Vinny is his first name. So in fact, all the photographs that I've been posting on the Bulldogs football games that I've been shooting with them in Ulta 4.5, 300 4.5. That's Vinny's. He's the defensive line coach for that team. So that's how I got sucked into taking photos of his boys. But Vinny was a classic practical joker, and one night or one afternoon, I was exhausted. We'd been out all day. It was like 4:00. We were going to be going out again that night, and I fell asleep. And my little spot was between a couple of rows of MRE boxes on the breezeway right in front of the music hall at the Baptist Seminary. And all of a sudden, I hear Vinny shout, "On your feet, the general's here." I'm like, oh my God. Okay, so what am I supposed to do? I wake up, like I'm not in the military, but I better damn well stand up if a general's going to come by. So I stand up and I reach down to get my glasses, and everybody's at attention by their cots or wherever they were sitting or sleeping. So the whole company's standing at attention. And I look down to grab my glasses, and I'm surrounded by porn magazines and bottles of hand lotion. And the porn mags were open. And this was not like Playboy. This was soldier porn, which is like German kink porn. Like, oh my God, I thought I saw a goat in one. So yeah, I'm like freaking out. Like I've got my little den of sin right around all these MRE boxes, and I'm just completely panicked. And the guys just all busted out laughing. It was all a joke. So yeah. Anyway, so yeah. So I when I came home, I gave all the photos that I had to the guys, and stayed in touch with them. They're some of the closest people to me as a result of that experience.
Yeah. One of the things that I mean, it had a big effect on your life and on your personality, as you've already said there. And again, it's just something that we were chatting beforehand. Photography was something that helped you deal with some of your issues. Is that fair to say?
Oh yeah, totally. And it really, I think that really began in the summer of 2009. I had this crazy collaboration go totally south with a person who he had a really amazing story, and what he did was really amazing, but he was not a healthy person, and he literally drove me into the ground to the point where I thought I was having a heart attack at one point, and went to the hospital with chest pains. And that was sort of like a turning point moment for me. I thought, no amount of money is worth my peace of mind, and this was the largest contract I'd ever received before. So walking away from it was not an easy thing to do, but I walked away from it. And I thought my career was over at that point, because my agent was pretty upset with me. The publisher, of course, was extremely upset. The book never got published. He went through 3 other writers and an editor, and the book was rejected twice. and that was it. And when it came out, or when it came to light that it had been canceled, I had just published Outlaw Platoon with Sean Parnell, and it had done very, very well. So I felt like that decision was finally vindicated. But for a long time, I thought I had destroyed my career. So that summer, I spent a lot of time with my Canon 40D at the time in the wildlife refuge, photographing egrets. And I really got into the osprey because they're such unique and interesting creatures. So I took just tons and tons of osprey photos with a Sigma 100 to 500. And then at the end of the summer, I was getting ready to go photograph a training camp for an MMA fighter I was writing a book with, Brian Stan. We were writing Heart for the Fight. So I was in my little black Solstice driving east when I got the news that that my unofficially adopted son, Taylor Marks, had been killed in Iraq. And he and his truck commander, Earl Warner, ended up being the last Oregon National Guardsman to be killed in Iraq. And I was supposed to be on that deployment. So, and I had helped train the battalion that went. My little volunteer group of civilians had been their bad guys. We were their OPFOR. So we would be, in buildings on the military bases here, and they would have to come and clear us out, zip cuff us, detain us, interrogate us, all those sorts of things. At one of the events, I was I was role playing an Iraqi village elder, and the first sergeant's wife took photos of me getting the absolute hell beaten out of me by these guys I was in New Orleans with in this training exercise. The company commander was like in my ear on a radio going, "You need to keep resisting, keep fighting." And then my friend Adrian Wilson knocked a tooth out by accident. So I hear from him periodically. He just goes, "I still have your tooth, John." Jeez. Anyway, I digress. After Taylor died, I basically lost myself in photography. I didn't think I was going to write military history again. I didn't think I could do it. So I was out every day taking photos. And eventually, when I went to Afghanistan, the photography had become not just an adjunct to what I do for a living, but also a passion. But when I came home, it was probably a year and a half before I picked the gear up again. So when I look back at all of the hard drives and raids I've got of my photos, there's this gap from the end of 2010 to early 2012. And then I was lucky to get an option for Indestructible, the book that came out in 2016. And Sony Pictures and Mark Gordon Production picked it up, and I used the money from that option to buy a 1DX, some lenses for the EF system, and then I was doing some theater photography, and the Sony A7R II had just come out. And that was, the first camera that I had ever seen where you could shoot in completely silent mode. And the 1DX in a movie theater, in a theater, sounds like a machine gun, and it's completely disruptive to the audience.
Yeah.
So being able to shoot in silent mode was vital, and that's when my love of classic photography really developed, because I was told, "Hey, you can adapt anything from any time period onto this." I thought, really? Wow. So I started shooting the theater productions with Ingenua's 70 to 210s and Leica 90s and things like that. I just started getting into it from there. One of the things that got me into it was looking at the photos that Robert Capa took during World War II. That guy, when you think about landing on Omaha Beach with a Contax 2 and a Zeiss 50, and you're literally right on the surf line trying to take photos of everything that was happening. What are those photos called? Like the Magnificent 11 or the Magnificent 13 that survived? I mean, my God, that's a real photographer right there. And then he later did the jump into Germany, the last airborne drop of the war, which was called Operation Varsity. And his photos from the landing zone in March of 45 during that operation are even more stunning than the ones on Omaha Beach. So I started looking at those guys, and like Walter Ayus, he's the Sports Illustrated photographer who shot the photo of Dwight Clark making the catch in the 82 NFC title game between the Cowboys and the 49ers. One of the iconic sports moments. Thought, I'm never really going to feel like I'm a true photographer until I can do something like that. And that's how I got into all the manual sports photography and carrying the camera around and with manual lenses into military exercises too.
All right. Well, speaking of cat photography,
For the benefit of our listeners, we just had a little pause there, and we were just wondering, let's take it somewhere else now. And Johnny's done a seamless link, so we'll carry on with this cat link now.
Yeah, so we've gotten to know your little menagerie of well photographed animals quite well. So I think everybody wants to know a little bit more about. If you tell us a little bit more about your subject matter. And I mean, I will say too, I'm amazed at the shots you get of like cats and stuff scurrying around with manual. I mean, I wouldn't even go there. I wouldn't even try. So I'm amazed at the shots you get of them actually.
All right. There's some prophecy here that I need to come clean on. So in 2009, my volunteer group was role-playing various bad guys for Eugene SWAT. So the SWAT team comes out every year to Camp Rylea, and they work on different scenarios. So we were bank robbers. We were at one point doing a domestic disturbance where one of my volunteers was our kid, and I was role-playing a husband and wife team with actually a friend of mine from high school named Allison. And Allison and I were screaming at each other, creating this domestic violence argument. And meanwhile, the SWAT team is silently getting a ladder to the second floor of the building we were in to get our role-playing child out of the house to get that person safe. And the whole argument that Allison crafted was that my cat photography was not selling, that we were broke. And at one point she screamed so loud, she said, "Yeah, and you're no Stephen Ambrose either." And all the SWAT guys outside just busted out laughing. And the cat photography and cat portraits that only my mother would buy became sort of a running joke for years. And then flash forward to 2015, 2016, this is what I do. Like every day I'm taking my family of dogs out with the cat now in 2018, 2019 to exercise them, and I shoot every day. So my subject matter are these animals. So that's how it all kind of came about. We have a Jordanian dog named Gwen. She was rescued by an Apache gunship pilot named Cassie Wiley, who is now a police officer in Nevada. And she and I had met in Afghanistan. She essentially saved my life. We went back to Azuristan, that little outpost that we were flying to when the helicopter went down, the next day. And everybody was taking fire going into the LZ, and Cassie suppressed a rocket-propelled grenade team that was shooting into the landing zone so that we could get in. And I ended up meeting her and interviewing her. She was one of maybe 2 or 3 female gunship pilots in the brigade, and we stayed friends. And she ended up finding these little orphaned puppies in a subsequent deployment to Jordan, and we raised some money and got 2 of the 4 out. And she has one, and I have the other. So she's the gold one. Then we have an Aussie Shepherd that was a rescue, and then that weird little bat-eared flying monkey dog that's sort of a proto-skunk cat thing named Musette. That was my daughter's dog. So those 3 come out, and the cat, the white cat, is Sylvie. And I didn't want another animal, but the kids wanted a kitten last year, so we ended up with 2. And Sylvie quickly established that she has so much energy that she could not be an indoor cat. And I didn't want them wandering around the neighborhood, so I just got into the habit of taking her along for the dog walks, and she followed along, and I started taking photos of the way they were interacting, which just cracks me up. They're always doing something weird. So that's the genesis of that. But Johnny, you're a cat fan. Tell me about, you have a cat? Do you photograph it?
No, she won't allow that. She does not allow that. She does not submit to photographs. She, as soon as I get the camera out, she turns away, turns her head, stops whatever she's doing, walks away. I mean, it's like she really knows, and she's like, I'm not having it. So I get very little opportunity to do any cat photography.
Gotcha, Roger.
Yeah.
Well, I do a lot of testing on Sylvie. I'll get a new lens, and
yeah.
Everybody I know in my life is so tired of me photographing them that if I even point a camera their way, they just look at me and go, "Dad, stop it," or "John, get that camera out of my face." Sylvie never does that. I mean, she for whatever reason, I think she's a bit of a ham. So I'll put her in a tree. I have a bokeh tree. So I'll put her on this one branch, and I'll step back, and if the sun's just right, I'll be able to get some good examples of what the bokeh looks like with a particular lens. So whenever I get a new lens, I take the cat out to this tree, put her in the tree, and she'll sit on that branch for a while, and then she gets annoyed and leaves. But it always gives me an opportunity to see what the lens is capable of. So she's sort of my test subject too.
Yeah, I do that with my cat too.
Perry, what kind of cat do you have?
A fat one.
I hear that. Sylvia's gained. She was like 5 pounds earlier this spring. Like when she decided to go swim up at Detroit Lake in the Cascades, she was maybe 5.5. And then we put her on the scale at the vet last week. She's 11.6 pounds. And I thought she had FIP. I was like really worried she had the wet form.
11.6?
Yeah.
My cat is 18 pounds.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Partly because,
crap.
I mean, a lot of that is because she's just a huge cat. Like when she stretches out, I think she's a mix. I adopted her as a rescue in Canada when she was a tiny kitten. And I'm convinced that she's part Norwegian forest cat, partly because of how she looks. But also when she stretches out, she's like well over a meter long.
Oh my God.
Yeah, she I have a 3-seater couch in my living room, and when she stretches out, she will occupy all 3 of the cushions.
Wow.
So she's not like one of these little cats, but she's also incredibly fat.
Wow, my cat weighs 5.5 pounds. So
yeah, my cat would eat your cat.
Sounds like it. Oh my God. But hey, Norwegian forest cats are beautiful. They are really, really good looking animals.
Oh yeah. No, she's gorgeous. I just she's a very good photographic test subject. I do exactly the same thing and test most of my lenses on my cat. But every night she likes to sleep on my leg as well. Which is not good for blood flow, I will say.
Yeah, you can't get gangrene from blood loss in the leg there. But so how did she handle the trip from Canada to Hong Kong? Did that traumatize her?
Well, I don't know. I had never asked. But I did do a lot of reading about that. And what I did was you don't give them any food during the flight. So in her water bottle, I put this sort of like herbal cat relaxer, which was supposed to sort of calm her nerves. And then what I read was because
Herbal
they go
cat-
into
Are you saying that you drugged your cat up?
yeah, essentially. But then they go into a pressurized and temperature controlled hold at the back. And what I read is they sort of freak out for the first little while, and then because she's in her carrier and it smells familiar, after a while when they realize they can't do much, they just sleep for most of the flight. So when she came out after the flight, she seemed totally fine. Just what cats do when they're in a new environment, because she's an indoor cat, so it's not like your cat where she's running around all over the place. So when she's in a new environment, it's just like come out, find somewhere to hide, and then slowly explore. So I think she just took the flight as a long mandatory nap.
All right, well, that's the way to do it.
Yeah.
When Gwen arrived, she was maybe 7 or 8 weeks old, and she flew in from Jordan to Chicago, spent the night in Chicago, and then when she flew from Chicago to Portland, her water dish froze over. So when we got her, her food and her water were totally frozen. So she like, this poor dog. I mean, the first thing I did, I was worried that a dog from the Middle East may have some unusual bacteria or disease or germs or something. So I didn't want to put her around the other dogs until I was sure she was healthy. So she arrived on like a Friday evening, or Friday afternoon. So I couldn't take her to the vet. It was too late. So I decided to take her up to the cabin in the woods that I ride in. And I drove up there in my little Pontiac GTO, which is the car that you will meet, Johnny, when I come to Binge Shop at Central Camera next spring. And it was snowing. And this car, this little Pontiac, has 400 horsepower, but it does not do inclement weather like that well at all. And I got Gwen out of the car at one point, and she looks down at, like, why is the sand so cold? The look on her face was just pure astonishment. And it was freezing cold. And I ended up getting the GTO stuck in a snowbank, and I couldn't get it out. And then I blew the radiator trying to get it out. And we ended up getting rescued by a evangelical Christian tow truck driver who told me it was God's will that all of this happened and that we were saved by it, which was pretty amazing. And we were hyperthermic at that point because it was so cold. So that was Gwen's initiation to the United States. And I took photos of all of this, of course. So all it was all going down, I'm like taking photos of this poor dog that had never seen snow before, just in a totally foreign environment. She'd been in, the Middle East desert. And flash forward about 6 months, I was up off a fire access trail, and my daughter's little bat-eared Papillon locked herself in my GTO with the engine running. And the same tow truck driver saved us. And he gets out of the car and he out of the tow truck and looks at me and goes, "Man, what is it with you and your dogs?" Well, it's God's will. But anyway, I digress. So I actually have a question for Perry.
Yeah.
So your photos of the protests are amazing, and your photographs of the police are they're foreboding. There's just such power in the imagery you're capturing. My question for you, Perry, is why do it? Why take the risk? Why expose yourself to potential harm in the street and potential arrest for posting the photos? Like what's driving you there?
Oh man, that is a meaty question. I honestly I don't know.
And do you take your cat with you?
No, definitely not. I really don't know. It just seems like the thing to do because there's nothing else that I can do. It, I mean, partly as the situation has deteriorated and gotten worse and worse, and the police have become more and more heavy-handed, and the protests have become more and more violent. I think I partly got desensitized to some of that. Because it's got to the point where it's like, you know what? I could be just walking home from work and just get the crap beaten out of me by the cops. Or like those shots of the police that I posted recently, I was out for afternoon tea. And then I went outside and there were riot police everywhere. I was like, oh, okay, I guess, you know, what am I going to do? There's riot police everywhere. I'm going to photograph them. And, you know, it's one of those things where I think there are so many photographers and amazing photojournalists here. The stuff that I'm doing, I don't think is particularly special. It's just my way of partly documenting, partly just, I don't know. I don't even know what I'm trying to accomplish with these photographs. But if you look out there are some people who are just pumping out unbelievable images, both photojournalists and just sort of hobbyist photographers. Actually, there's one guy I want to plug in particular. He owns a camera store here where they sell a bunch of Leica stuff, but he also shoots, and he's part of this, what do you call him, like a photo collective. So his name is Joe, and his Instagram account is Chengwai Hawk, which is CHENGWAIHOK. His shop is awesome, but his photos of the protests are phenomenal. They're unreal. So if you want to see some seriously amazing stuff, I would go check out his Instagram feed. Yeah, but as to what motivates me,
I
really don't know.
I was just going to say I've got strangely enough, he started following me recently, which I I'm putting down to the fact that you're connected with him, because I can't see any other reason why he would follow me. But I have actually started to follow him as well, and what you just said there about his photographs, they're quite extraordinary. There's shots here with I don't know if it's a man or a woman holding up a crucifix and some rosary beads at the riot police in front of her, and there's
that was Halloween.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, so what they did was they went and tear gassed the largest Halloween party in Asia because it was an unauthorized assembly and people were wearing masks. And so there was this really powerful image of it's an old lady standing there with a crucifix and sort of prayer beads, and she's just standing in between the crowd, which was sort of half protesters, half drunk Halloween partiers, probably more of the drunk Halloween partiers. And so she's standing in between them and just holding a cross up at the riot police who are stood in formation across from her. It's there's quite a few photos of that scene, but he shot it from like her point of view, and it's incredibly powerful. And you know what blows my mind about his shots is his composition is amazing, and a lot of his shots are in the middle of clouds of tear gas. So I'm just thinking, man, Joe, you're out here. He's a really nice guy. I've met him a bunch of times and been to his shop quite a few times. But I'm like, man, you're out there getting tear gassed and pumping out these unbelievable images. It's really incredible stuff. Yeah,
there's just what you're saying there is just so true. But I mean, there's another shot here that I'm looking at, and there's I don't know if it was once a burning barricade or something like that, and there's I guess one of the protesters, because he's obviously not a policeman, running along with with what looks like a fire extinguisher, and he's silhouetted perfectly with this fire, and he's running along quickly. There's just so much action and urgency in the shot, and it's just like you're saying that compositionally, he's in the middle of a riot, and in fact so many times, and he's just absolutely getting these shots exactly as you would ever hope to be able to do, and he's just doing it time and time again.
Yeah.
Well, Perry, you're capturing the first draft of history, and you're doing things there that 95% of photographers out there probably would never take the risk. So I got to tell you, my hat is off to you, and I respect the hell out of you for what you're doing. But
thank you.
In all of our private messages, I know I probably sound like this total mother hen. Be careful, be careful. My God, I'm almost like tempted to establish a fund or something for you in case you do get detained, so that we've got bail money we can get to you quickly or something. Get you out quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it's a double-edged sword, because you would obviously prefer none of this craziness to happen, but at the same time, it's weird because, like I mentioned, part of it feels like almost a sense of desperation of like, this is the only thing I can really do other than complain. But the other part of it is, I got to admit, it's an incredible photographic opportunity, and there is a part of me that when I'm out shooting, it's not that I don't care about my own safety, because I'm really good at running away before they start tear gassing us. I haven't been tear gassed yet, but when I'm actually shooting, it is a normal exercise. I shoot it the way I would normally shoot street. I think about composition, I think about timing, I think about the emotion and story I try to convey. And the other day, when I had a 28mm wide angle on my Canon 5L2, I found it exhilarating getting like right up in the cops' faces, to the point where one of them, she tapped me with her baton, which that was the moment where I was like, okay, maybe it's a little too close. But
you think? Oh my God,
little bit. But it was I was in the moment shooting, and it's weird.
Yeah.
But it's kind of exhilarating.
Yeah. I know what you mean. I don't know if I've shared that photo I have of the time I almost got my ass kicked in Chicago by the cops, but during the Gulf War protests. But yeah, it is definitely exhilarating when you get in that moment and in that place where you're in the middle of what's going on, but it's like you really have to remember to pull yourself back from that from that moment.
Yeah.
So Johnny, tell me about that photo and what was happening. I drove through the middle of two protests during the Gulf War, right after the bombing campaign started. Yeah. I was in a 1956 Ford Victoria, which was my first car, and the pro-war protesters were throwing bottles at the anti-war protesters who were chucking bottles back, and they were like sailing over my car, and I just remember thinking, oh my God.
Where is this? Portland or something?
I was Eugene. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. They don't let the shit like that happen in Chicago. That's purely a West Coast thing where they let people throw things. That does not happen in Chicago. They will be on you in a second, and they will beat you down, and they will arrest you. So there's nothing gets thrown.
Wow.
Yeah, but the reason nothing gets thrown is because they will beat you down. So people don't do that stuff in Chicago. They will just be on you, and they would arrest you. But yeah, it was I feel like it's a kind of the missing history of the Gulf War, that it was this big popular thing, and everybody was in favor of it. But in a lot of cities across the country, Chicago being one of them, there were thousands and thousands of people on the street protesting and shutting the streets down. So I was going to school downtown when this happened, and it was literally happening like around my school where I go to school. So I was shooting on those. There was like a couple of nights of when the protests were really big and going. So I always tried to stay not I tried to stay away from the protest group so as not to be kind of confused with as a protester, because I was doing it more as a, trying to just kind of record the whole thing as a documentarian. So I was out in front of this protest group as they were turning down to come down Lakeshore Drive, which is like the main highway that runs along the lake here in Chicago. And there was a huge police barricade with, paddy wagons and horses and all this stuff. And so I was crouched down shooting. I was probably 200-300 yards ahead of the protest itself. And the cops were like, yeah, man, this is going to be like 68. Let's do it. And they had their batons out and they were just ready to, to split heads basically. And so I'm taking pictures of him, and this one cop finally noticed me, and he started coming over towards me, with baton in hand. And then another cop kind of called him back and told him not to do it, I guess, or whatever. So I turned and I got out of there really quick, but I did get that photo. And it was one of those times where you realize you have to have a really clear head doing protest photography. And I've been in other protests like that in Chicago where you really have to keep an eye on like exit routes and where you're going to go if something happens and which direction you can go. It's like part of your brain has to always be attuned to how you can get out of the situation, I guess.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, so as long as you can do that, I mean, it's just avoiding getting caught in the middle of something if possible.
Johnny, what were you shooting with? Oh, I'm sorry, Craig.
Oh no, go ahead.
Camera wise?
Yeah.
That would have been my Minolta X700. I mean, that was the only camera I had when I was in college. So, it would have been a Minolta X700 and probably a 50 millimeter lens.
Awesome.
You get caught in the moment
of those cameras.
What's that? I'm sorry.
Oh, I was gonna. Sorry, go ahead, John.
Sorry, Perry. No, you go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say you get caught in the moment. Like, you're absolutely right. I was hyper aware of which routes the riot police had blocked off and which routes were fairly safe for me to leave.
Right.
But at that specific moment when that cop, basically they were just patrolling up and down this street. Not a lot was happening. It just looked kind of menacing. And at that moment when she tapped me with her baton, basically she was just telling me to get out of their way. And when I pressed the shutter, my immediate thought when that happened was not, oh man, I'm going to get beat. It was, oh, I hope I pressed the shutter early enough. Which it turns out I didn't. But then at the same time, you're right that on the one hand, you have to balance not getting beaten up by the cops. But on the other hand, so when you're actually shooting, like, you want to get this shot, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
when she waved the baton at me, my thought was, yes, this is the kind of image that I've been like waiting for this entire time. And then it's all blurry and stuff, but whatever.
Right.
Though that makes it more powerful in some respects, because the technical aspects of any particular photograph, those are the things that photographers look at. But your average person isn't looking, at that at all. They're looking at the emotional impact that the photograph gives them, that visceral reaction. And so when I saw that photo, I just went, holy crap. And by the way, my son saw it. He's like, Dad, I want to go to Hong Kong and film. If he decides to go to the photojournalist route, honestly, if he decides he wants to go photograph a war, I'm going to shoot him in the foot. No. But anyway.
Yeah. Guys, I think we need to start to pull this we're coming to the end of our time. It's already tomorrow in Hong Kong as well.
It is.
Yeah. John, it's been it's been an honour to listen to you. I mean, the stories that you've come through there, well, the experience that you've shared with us has been absolutely fantastic, and I hope our listeners feel the same way.
Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure and an honor to be with you guys. Like, this podcast means a lot to me. I found it and I realized that there was a tribe. You know, I'm the only guy that shoots classic lenses aside from one of the other employees over at our local shop. So it really felt like I found a home here. So being on the show really sort of underscores that. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah,
so I just want to say thank you to the people who have donated to us this week very, very quickly, and two which or without messages, and that's one from Dan Dodd, thank you very much, and one from a regular donation from Lawrence Dunn, thank you very much, Lawrence. And we also have a message from our guest from 2 weeks ago, from Bill Pavetta. And another great podcast there. Thanks for having me as a guest on episode 90. It was such a thrill to hear my name mentioned along the likes of Simon, Johnny and Perry. I wish I could buy you guys your own coffee shop. So thank you very much, Bill. Really appreciated there. And if anybody wants to donate to us, then you're more than welcome to do so on coffee.com. That's ko-fi.com, and just do a search for Classic Lenses Podcast and you'll find our page. So thank you all there. Perry, have you got any shout outs this week?
Have I got any shout outs this week? I don't think so.
That's okay. And Johnny, are you going to shout outs this week?
I have a couple real quick. I was meaning to mention this last episode, but I got Andre Dominguez has been sending out prints to folks just as a way to say hello and share the love. So I wanted to thank Andre for the cool print that he sent me. He sent me a photo of when he was visiting Chicago. It's a picture of the front of Central Camera. So super nice print. Thank you very much, Andre. That is much appreciated. And I want to say a quick shout out to Jeremy Zorns, who I met on Saturday, who was doing his photo walk, which I think had a relatively small turnout. It was kind of cold and nasty out, but they had a good time. So Jeremy was there at Central Camera. I got to chat with him for a few minutes, and cool to meet you.
Okay, and I've got two shout-outs. I've got my usual shout-out for the Six Towns Darkroom in Stoke-on-Trent, which is on every Tuesday night. So if you fancy developing film and having a go at printing, or just talking about old lenses and cameras and things, then you're more than welcome to come down. So just get in touch with me via the many ways you can get in touch with me on social media, which we'll go through later. And I just want to say thank you again to Jeremy North, because I've still got his in fact I've actually got two Contax G2 cameras in black in a proper Contax case that and I need to finish that roll of film. So it's been absolutely great shooting with that camera, Jeremy, so thank you for lending that to me. Okay, back to John. You, apart from you've got a book coming out in January, how can people see where your work is, the best places to buy it, or read about what you do and things like that?
JohnBruning.com is my official website. It'll take you straight to the Indestructible page. Indestructible is one of the books that I wrote. If you search my name, John R. Bruning, on Amazon, my books come up, and the ones that I collaborated on also come up. The one that's coming out in January should be at Costco's and Barnes & Nobles and Books A Million. I'm hoping that it'll be in the UK. I know Indestructible was. Either way, I'll send you a copy, Simon. So, yeah, there's definitely a crossover or an intersection between the classic lens audience and World War II history. That was one of the things that really surprised me, running into some of my readers on the page, including Jose, and also. It's surprising to find in a non-aviation area people who know what B-29s are and Aero Ectars. Yeah, it's pretty wonderful. Anyway, just wanted to say that.
I've got my Aero Ectars just beside me at the moment, waiting for something big enough to use it with.
Right on. By the way, I am on Instagram as John R. Bruning, and Sylvie is on Instagram as well, the cat. And she's Sylvie the Canine Cat. So if you have any interest in seeing more of those photos, they're there on Instagram.
Yeah, I saw Sylvie followed me on Instagram, which is very, very, very nice of her.
She is a fan.
Yeah, and I saw a few pictures. And I'm thinking, I know that cat. I know that cat. Yeah. Yeah, so do follow Sylvie the Canine Cat. That's with underscores in between. So Sylvie _ Canine Cat. Right. So Perry, how can people follow you outside of this podcast?
You can find me on Instagram and Flickr at PerryG, or if you want to visit my non-updated website, it's perryg.com.
Okay, and Johnny?
You can follow me at System Photography on Instagram, and what else? You can find me at Central Camera Company also, here in Chicago.
Except on a Monday.
Except on a Monday. Yeah, I won't be there on Monday. I'll be here, sitting at a microphone doing this on a Monday, so I won't be there.
And if people want to get in touch with us, what's the best way?
Send us an email at classiclensespodcast@gmail.com, of course. And, of course, make sure that you follow us along. Well, yeah. I mean, you're not going to follow us on Instagram, but you're going to follow us along on our website, which is classiclensespodcast.com. So do that there. And then follow along. Who you should follow along on Instagram is Best Vintage Lens. So check out Best Vintage Lens on Instagram. I think they're still on hiatus from writing any show reviews because we don't talk about digital enough. But maybe they will do that, so you could follow that there.
Let's hope.
Yeah.
And if anybody wants to listen to the show, but they can't, but they want to have words to go along with.
Oh right, yes, yeah. You can, I think, stare at a blank YouTube video page and you can see the words. For the podcast, yeah. So you could do that at Classic Lenses Podcast over on YouTube. So check that excitement out.
Exactly. And so we're all in the Facebook group, the Classic Lenses Podcast, and we also hang out a little bit as well in the photography with classic lenses. But things to do with our podcast is in that podcast group. So that's our main one for anything podcast related there. I do my own links. I'm on Twitter as Simon4. I'm on Instagram as Simon Forster Photographic, and seeing that Johnny and Perry like to keep their feeds nice and clean of podcast related information, I don't. I put podcast stuff on there, so that might be a way of talking about the podcast as well on my feed. What else? I've got an eBay shop, and if you go to the links, you will see a link to my eBay shop and those wonderful lenses that I'm selling. The best place to see those links is either in the... Actually, no, I don't think we put the links up in the podcast group, do we, on Facebook? Because it breaks the links, doesn't it? There's problems with that.
Yeah, that's right.
So the best place to see, the show notes and all of the links that we put for every show, and that's our website, which is classiclensespodcast.com. So www.classiclensespodcast.com. And I'm sure there's something else I've forgotten. I know that I need to say thank you to Kevin McLeod of Incompetech.com for our music, and that's it. You can hear me twice a week as well as on this podcast, because I do the large format photography podcast with Andrew Bartram, and we've had a few cracking episodes there, some of which might even be interesting to people that aren't interested in large format photography, because it's more of a general photography based discussion. So I urge you to have a listen to that. So that's it. So just a final thanks to John. John, you've been great. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much, guys. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
That's it. And so that's it from us. I hope you've enjoyed this week's show, and if you can, be like KARL.